She named 23 spices with flawless precision, and for that she was poisoned. The billionaire's challenge seemed simple: identify every ingredient in his custom dish or be fired on the spot. With her daughter's medical bills piling up, Maria couldn't afford to fail. But when she tasted the final sample to confirm her guess, her throat closed around a contaminated bite meant for the sheikh himself. Her impossible knowledge didn't just save her job, it saved a life by nearly costing her own. This is Maria, a 28-year-old single mother who worked double shifts at Al Jannah, a restaurant in Dubai where a single dinner could cost more than her monthly salary. Her daughter, 5-year-old Amira, had a rare heart condition requiring surgeries Maria couldn't afford. Every shift, every tip, every hour mattered. So when Sheikh Rahman, a regular with a taste for elaborate challenges, rose from his private table and announced that the waitress who could name all the spices in his custom dish would keep her job, and anyone who failed would be dismissed on the spot, Maria knew she had no choice. She stepped forward, hands trembling, and began to list ingredients from memory. She got through 23, then she collapsed. What she didn't realize was that the dish had been deliberately poisoned, and her extraordinary palate had just intercepted an assassination attempt. The real question no one was asking: who inside that restaurant wanted a billionaire dead, and how deep did the conspiracy run? To answer that, you have to understand who Maria really was, and why her tongue was the most dangerous weapon in that restaurant the night everything went wrong. Maria Joseph was born in a village outside Kochi, in Kerala, India, where the air always smelled of monsoon rain and roasting cumin. Her grandmother, Amachi Rani, was a spice trader who could identify over 200 different varieties just by rubbing them between her fingers and inhaling once. The old woman never learned to read or write. But she knew the exact moment a cardamom pod was perfectly ripe, the precise shade of saffron that meant it had never been adulterated, and the way sumac should tickle the back of your throat like a whispered secret. She passed all of that down to her granddaughter, not through books, but through thousands of hours in a tiny kitchen with a mud floor and a single window. Every morning before school, Maria would sit cross-legged on that floor, blindfolded, while Amachi placed pinches of powder on her tongue. Black pepper from the Malabar coast, turmeric from Erode, cinnamon from the hills of Winad. She learned to hear the difference between star anise and fennel seeds just by the way they rattled in a wooden bowl. By the time she was 12, Maria could recreate any dish she had eaten once, breaking down the spice profile in her mind like a musician reading sheet music. But that gift, that extraordinary sensory intelligence, was also the reason she ended up in Dubai 8 years ago, alone, pregnant, and desperate. A man she loved had promised her a future. He vanished the moment the pregnancy test showed 2 lines. Her grandmother had passed away 6 months earlier, taking with her the last safety net Maria had. The village had nothing left for her, and Amira was coming. So Maria signed a contract with a recruitment agency that placed workers in the glittering kitchens and dining rooms of the United Arab Emirates. She arrived at Dubai International Airport with a single suitcase, a belly swollen under her abaya, and the taste of Amachi's ginger tea still clinging to her memory like a farewell gift. Al Jannah, the restaurant where she eventually landed as a waitress, meant the paradise. The name was ironic if you worked there. It occupied the 38th floor of a luxury hotel overlooking the Palm Jumeirah, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave every diner a view of the Arabian Gulf. Plates of gold leaf-crusted lamb chops sold for 600 dirhams. A bottle of water cost more than Maria earned in an hour. The clientele included oil magnates, royal family members, Bollywood stars, and Russian oligarchs who treated the menu like a suggestion, not a rule. They demanded impossible things: a vegan version of the chef's signature bone marrow dish, a paella cooked tableside in 10 minutes flat, a spice blend so rare it existed only in one mountain range in Iran. The waitstaff were expected to smile through all of it, move like shadows, and remember that the customer was always, terrifyingly, right. Maria learned to disappear in plain sight. Her uniform was black, her hair pinned tightly, her accent softened into something polite and placeless. She worked double shifts most days because Amira's hospital bills were a bottomless well. The little girl had been diagnosed with tetralogy of Fallot, a congenital heart defect that required a series of surgeries. The first operation had cost 87,000 dirhams. Maria had borrowed it from loan sharks in Deira who called her phone at midnight if a payment was late. She had sold her grandmother's gold bangle, the only heirloom she possessed, to a dealer in the gold souk for a fraction of its worth. Every dirham she earned that didn't go to rent went into a tin box under her bed labeled Amira's heart. Her co-workers at Al Jannah knew about her gift. When a chef was stumped by a picky customer's complaint, he'd summon Maria from the dining room to taste the sauce and name the missing ingredient. She always knew. She'd whisper fenugreek, but toasted too long, or the saffron is counterfeit, it's dyed safflower, and the kitchen would adjust. But her talent was a curiosity, not a career path. In the rigid hierarchy of a Dubai fine dining restaurant, a waitress from Kerala with a supernatural palate was still a waitress from Kerala. Her job was to carry plates, not to be extraordinary. Sheikh Rahman was the exception among the regulars. He was a member of a sprawling Emirati family with interests in shipping, real estate, and defense contracting. His net worth was rumored to exceed $9 billion. But unlike the other billionaires who dined at Al Jannah, Sheikh Rahman had a peculiar obsession with what he called culinary games. He would challenge chefs to identify obscure ingredients while he watched with a faint, amused smile. He once sent back a plate of 600 dirham lamb because the chef couldn't name the exact mountain village in Iran where the saffron was harvested. He was charming, but his charm had edges. The staff feared him. The management indulged him. He was too rich to offend, too powerful to refuse. On the night of March 11th, a Thursday, Sheikh Rahman arrived at Al Jannah with a party of 12 men. They occupied the private dining room, a space enclosed by frosted glass and silk curtains, where decisions about oil futures and weapons contracts were made over lobster and champagne. The sheikh was in a mood. He had just completed a major acquisition of a port in East Africa, and his companions were in high spirits. The restaurant's general manager, a nervous Frenchman named Claude Laroche, personally oversaw the service, checking every plate before it left the kitchen, polishing every glass with a white cloth until it squeaked. At 9:45, halfway through the meal, Sheikh Rahman rose from his chair and gestured for the dining room's curtains to be opened so the main restaurant could see him. He held up a shallow bowl filled with a dark, fragrant stew. It was his own creation, he announced. A dish prepared by his personal chef, blending spices from 8 countries, a recipe that had taken 2 years to perfect. He had a proposal for the waitstaff of Al Jannah. Any server who could identify every single spice in this dish would receive a bonus of 100,000 dirhams, triple their annual salary. But anyone who attempted and failed would be dismissed immediately. No severance, no warning, just gone. The dozen waiters and waitresses in the main dining room froze. Some looked at the floor, others glanced at Claude, whose face had gone pale. 100,000 dirhams was life-changing money, but the sheikh was notorious for his impossible tests. The last waiter who failed one of his challenges had been escorted out that same night and never worked in Dubai again. Nobody moved. For a long 15 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant crash of waves against the artificial island below. Then Maria stepped forward. Amira's next surgery was scheduled for April 4th. She needed 91,000 dirhams. She had saved 9. The loan sharks had started calling twice a day. The math was brutal, and it left only one answer. She walked past her terrified colleagues, past Claude's silent plea for her to stop, and into the private dining room where Sheikh Rahman was waiting with a predator's smile. He handed her a spoon. The dish, he explained, contained 24 spices in total. She would have a small taste of the broth, then name as many as she could. If she identified 23 correctly, the money was hers. Fail, and she'd be cleaning out her locker before the dessert course. Maria looked at the stew. It smelled of slow-cooked lamb, of rose petals steeped in stock, of something dark and earthy she couldn't immediately place. She dipped the spoon, lifted it to her lips, and closed her eyes. For a second, she was 10 years old again, barefoot in Amache's kitchen, the blindfold snug around her head. The world dissolved into pure sensation. "Come in," she said. toasted, not raw, black cardamom, 2 pods crushed with the seeds, saffron from Kashmir, genuine, not Spanish, sumac, Lebanese, Aleppo pepper, mild grade, turmeric, Aleppi variety, fresh, not dried, cinnamon, Ceylon, clove, hand-harvested, mace, nutmeg, fenugreek leaves, dried, black pepper, telecherry. Coriander seed, roasted, fennel, star anise. She paused, breathing. Dried lime, black lime, Omani, rose petals, galangal, long pepper, nigella seed, caraway. The room was silent. Sheikh Rahman's smile flickered, then widened. She had named 22, one left, and the final spice was the most elusive, a rare, almost extinct ingredient that even professional chefs struggled to identify. But Maria had tasted it once before, in a dish her grandmother made only on the holiest day of the year. Grains of paradise, she said softly, Meligetta pepper from West Africa, 23. The room erupted in applause. Even the Sheikh's companions looked impressed. For one glorious moment, Maria allowed herself to believe that her life had just changed, that Amira's surgery was paid for, that the loan sharks could be silenced. But Sheikh Rahman was not finished. "You have named 23 correctly," he said, his voice low and amused. "But you have only tasted the broth. The dish is not complete until you swallow a full spoon of the stew, including the meat. That is the final part of the challenge. Prove to me that your tongue is not a trick of chance. Consume the whole bite." The request was unreasonable, dangerous even, to consume a dish prepared by a stranger's hand with unknown ingredients. But Maria was not in a position to refuse. Her job, her daughter's life, her entire future hung on this moment. She looked at the sheikh. She looked at the spoon in her trembling hand, and she lifted it to her mouth. The taste was extraordinary, rich, layered, complex. And then beneath the symphony of spices, her palate detected a wrong note. A faint bitterness, metallic and acrid, something that did not belong. Before she could react, her throat began to tighten. Her vision blurred. Her knees gave way, and the spoon clattered to the marble floor. Sheikh Rahman's expression shifted from triumph to alarm as Maria collapsed, gasping, a thin line of foam forming at the corner of her lips. She had been poisoned. And as paramedics rushed into the private dining room, one truth became horrifyingly clear. The dish was never meant for the waitress brave enough to taste it. It was meant for the man who had ordered it. Maria's palate had just thwarted an assassination, but the killer was still in the room, watching. She woke 12 hours later in the intensive care unit of Rashid Hospital, tubes in her arm and a tube down her throat. Her vision was blurred, but she could make out shapes. A nurse adjusting the IV drip, a heart monitor beeping steadily, and at the foot of her bed, standing in the shadows where the fluorescent lights didn't reach, a figure in a dark suit. He was not a doctor. He was not security. He was holding her phone. The screen glowed with a single message sent to her contact labeled surgery deposit. The sender's number was blocked, but the words were not. The 23 spices did not include the final ingredient. That one was mine. Tell anyone what you tasted, and the next dose will reach your daughter. The man in the suit stepped forward into the light, and Maria saw his face for the first time. It was Claude Laroche, the general manager of Al Jannah. He smiled, placed her phone on the bedside table, and whispered 2 words before slipping out the door: "Stay silent." And in the hallway outside, the beeping of a heart monitor from a nearby room suddenly flatlined. The flatlining monitor belonged to Hadi Al-Mansur, the Sheikh's personal chef of 32 years and the man who had prepared the poisoned stew. He was found in a recovery room down the hall, an IV line still dangling from his arm, a lethal dose of aconitine, the same toxin that had almost killed Maria, pumped directly into his bloodstream. The official death certificate would later read cardiac arrest due to anaphylactic shock, but the timing was too perfect. Hadi had been silenced before he could speak, and Maria had heard the flatline with her own ears. She knew now that the man in the suit, Claude Laroche, was not acting alone. He had access to the hospital, to medical records, to the private rooms where a witness could be eliminated without a trace. And he had just demonstrated exactly how far he was willing to go. For the next 6 hours, Maria lay motionless in her ICU bed, pretending to be too sedated to speak. The breathing tube had been removed, but her throat was raw, her voice a ragged whisper she didn't dare use. Every time a nurse entered, Maria studied their face, their hands, the way they adjusted the IV. Were they real medical staff, or had Claude's people infiltrated the hospital? She couldn't know. Her phone was gone, confiscated by the man in the suit. Her daughter Amira was alone with a babysitter in a cramped apartment in Al Nada, and Maria had no way to warn anyone. The helplessness was a physical weight on her chest, heavier than the aconitine that had nearly stopped her heart. But something else was happening beyond the hospital walls. By sunrise, Sheikh Rahman had been briefed on the night's events. He learned that the dish prepared by his trusted chef had been laced with one of the deadliest plant toxins known to man, a poison so rare and so potent that a single gram could kill an elephant. The Dubai Police Forensic Lab had confirmed it. Monkshood, also known as wolfsbane, processed into a colorless, nearly tasteless powder that only a palate as refined as Maria's could have detected. Sheikh Rahman was not a man accustomed to fear. He had negotiated oil deals in war zones, stared down boardroom coups, and survived 3 previous attempts on his life. But this was different. This was intimate. Someone had tried to murder him using his own food, prepared by his own chef, served in a restaurant where he dined every week. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. He dispatched his head of security, a former British intelligence officer named Marcus Webb, to the hospital with explicit instructions. Find the waitress who saved my life, protect her at all costs, and find out who did this. Marcus arrived at Rashid Hospital at 7 in the morning, a tall man with grey hair and a face that revealed nothing. He bypassed the front desk, flashed a badge that opened every door, and walked directly into Maria's room. She was awake, staring at the ceiling, still mute with terror. When she saw him, she flinched, but Marcus did not threaten her. He sat down in the plastic chair beside her bed, placed his hands on his knees, and spoke in a voice so calm it was almost unnerving. "You don't know me," he said, "but I work for the man whose life you saved. And I need you to understand something. The people who did this are still out there. They will try again. And right now you are the only person alive who can identify what was in that dish. The chef is dead. The kitchen staff have been questioned and released. But you, Maria, you tasted the poison. You can recognize it. That makes you the most valuable witness in this investigation and the most vulnerable target." Maria finally spoke, her voice cracking. "My daughter. They said they will hurt my daughter." Marcus nodded slowly. "We know. The message on your phone has been recovered. We also know that Claude Laroche, the general manager of Al Jannah, visited your room last night. He is not here now. He vanished from the hospital security footage at 3:14 in the morning. His apartment in the marina is empty. His passport was scanned at Terminal 3, but no one matching his description boarded any flight." He leaned forward. "Someone is cleaning up, Maria. They killed Hadi. They will kill Claude the moment he stops being useful, and they will kill you unless you help us find them first." Before Maria could respond, the door swung open and a woman entered. She was Emirati, dressed in a crisp police uniform with the insignia of a lieutenant. Her name was Noor Al-Hashimi, and she was the lead investigator from Dubai Police's Major Crimes Division. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes and an intensity that filled the room. She looked at Marcus with undisguised suspicion. "I was not informed you would be here," she said. "With respect, Lieutenant, my employer does not require your permission to protect his own interests," Marcus replied coolly. Noor ignored him and turned to Maria. "Ms. Joseph, I need to take your statement. Everything you remember from last night, every taste, every face, every word that was spoken. I know you are frightened. I know you have been threatened. But I give you my word, I will not let anything happen to your daughter. I have already placed protective officers outside her apartment." That was the first moment Maria allowed herself to believe she might survive this, but the relief was short-lived. She began to recount the events of the evening, the challenge, the spices, the bitterness on her tongue. Noor's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it and her expression hardened. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway. When she returned 2 minutes later, the calm professionalism was gone, replaced by something colder. "The babysitter who was watching your daughter," Noor said carefully. "What was her name?" Maria's blood turned to ice. Rita Singh. She lives in the same building." "Why?" "Rita Singh was found unconscious in your apartment 30 minutes ago. There were signs of forced entry, but your daughter, Amira, she was not there. She is missing." The next 24 hours were a nightmare from which Maria could not wake. She was discharged from the hospital against medical advice, her body still weak from the poisoning, her mind consumed by a singular, desperate thought: find Amira. Noor launched a citywide search, mobilizing every available officer, but the investigation was immediately compromised. Someone inside the police department was leaking information. Every lead Noor pursued evaporated before she could reach it. The apartment building's security footage had been wiped. Neighbors had seen nothing. Rita, when she regained consciousness, could only remember a man in a dark uniform claiming to be from social services, saying he was authorized to take the child into protective custody. Sheikh Rahman, to his credit, did not abandon Maria. He transferred her to a secure residence in Emirates Hills, a mansion behind walls and gates, patrolled by Marcus Webb's private security team. It was a gilded cage, but Maria barely noticed the luxury. She spent her days staring at photographs of Amira, replaying every moment of their last conversation, torturing herself with the thought that she should have run when Claude first appeared at her bedside. She should have grabbed her daughter and fled the city before anyone could follow. Now it was too late. On the third day, Marcus came to her with a file. Inside were photographs of the 12 men who had dined with Sheikh Rahman at the private table that night. Business partners, government officials, 2 of the Sheikh's nephews, and a food critic from a global magazine. Any one of them could have tampered with the dish. Any one of them could have paid Claude Laroche to facilitate the assassination and silence the witnesses. But as Maria looked at the faces, something stirred in her memory, a sensory detail she had buried beneath the trauma. Faisal al-Rashid, the Sheikh's younger nephew, had been seated closest to the Sheikh during dinner. He had offered to serve the stew from the communal pot. He had insisted, in fact, over the objections of the other guests. And as he leaned across the table to fill his uncle's bowl, Maria remembered smelling something on his hands. Not cologne, something sharper, more medicinal. At the time, she had dismissed it as a hand sanitizer. Now she understood what it really was. He handled the poison, Maria whispered. Faisal, he put it in the stew when everyone was distracted. Marcus did not look surprised. We have been watching Faisal for 2 years. He has debts, enormous debts, to a cartel in Southeast Asia. His uncle refused to bail him out. He stood to inherit nothing unless the Sheikh died without revising his will. He paused. But Faisal did not work alone. He needed someone inside the restaurant to ensure his uncle ate the poisoned portion. Someone who could control the flow of service, who could make sure the right dish went to the right person and no one else. Claude, Maria said. Yes, and Claude had a partner on the medical side, someone who could access the hospital, kill Hadi, and arrange for your daughter's abduction. We believe that person is Dr. Farid Al-Zaruni, the attending physician who signed off on your toxicology report. He has been a family retainer to the Al-Rashids for 15 years. He was also having an affair with Claude Laroche. The conspiracy was tightening into a noose, but Maria could not see how it brought her closer to Amira. If Faisal had her daughter, he would use her as leverage to escape. If the Sheikh's people closed in too quickly, Amira would be killed. Every option was a trap. Then Noor called with a breakthrough. A housekeeper at a villa in Al-Barsha had reported a strange chemical smell coming from the basement. When officers raided the property, they found a makeshift laboratory, beakers, distillation equipment, and a small jar labeled Aconitum napellus, the botanical source of the poison. The villa was registered under a shell company owned by Faisal al-Rashid, but there was more. In the corner of the basement, hidden behind a stack of chemical drums, they discovered a child's pink backpack. Inside was a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. Maria had sewn that rabbit herself 2 years ago for Amira's 3rd birthday. The discovery changed everything. The search was no longer speculative. Amira had been held in that villa. The question was where they had taken her now. And as Noor's team combed through the property, they found a calendar with a date circled in red ink, March 18th, the day after tomorrow. Beside the date, 3 words in Arabic: Arabic Alif, Arabic Lam, Arabic Sheen, Arabic Het, Arabic Noon, Arabic Tet Mabuta, Arabic Ta, Arabic Hain, Arabic Alif, Arabic Dal, Arabic Rat. The shipment departs. Maria understood immediately. Faisal was not just trying to escape. He was planning to smuggle her daughter out of the country, removing the final witness who could link him to the assassination attempt. The clock was ticking, and the only advantage they had was Maria's palate. The one thing Faisal had underestimated, the one thing that could trace the poison back to its source and expose the entire conspiracy. If she could identify the exact batch of aconitine used, its processing method, the trace minerals that would pinpoint its geographic origin, she could not only prove Faisal's guilt, but potentially locate where the poison was manufactured and where Amira was being held before the shipment left Dubai forever. She turned to Marcus. "I need to go back to Al Jannah. I need to taste the stew again. The original broth is still in the evidence freezer. If I can isolate the bitter note, break it down like I did the spices, I might be able to tell you where the aconitine was harvested. That could lead us to Faisal's supplier, his safe house, my daughter." It was a desperate plan, a long shot built on a gift that had already nearly killed her once. But as Maria walked out of the mansion and into the armored car that would take her back to the scene of the crime, she felt something she had not felt since the poisoning: hope. It was fragile, dangerous, and entirely dependent on a talent she had inherited from a grandmother who could not read, but could taste the difference between survival and death. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, in a room where the air smelled of chemicals and fear, a 5-year-old girl clutched a one-eared rabbit and waited for her mother to find her before the shipment departed. The evidence freezer at Dubai Police Forensics was a cold, sterile vault on the outskirts of the city, far from the gleaming towers. Maria stepped out of the armored car, flanked by Marcus and 2 of his men, her legs still unsteady from the residual toxin in her blood. Nor met them at the entrance, her face grim. She had pulled strings to authorize this visit, a tasting of a poisoned dish by the very victim who had survived it, a procedure no protocol manual covered. The clock on the wall read 11:42 at night. The kitchen at Al Jannah had been sealed off since the attack, the stewed lamb frozen in a sealed evidence bag, awaiting a trial that might never happen because the accused were disappearing faster than the police could arrest them. The stew was brought out in a chilled steel container, still faintly aromatic even through the plastic. Maria sat at a metal table, a single spoon in front of her, the overhead fluorescent light buzzing. She had spent her entire life training for this moment, and yet her hands shook so violently she had to press them flat against the cold surface to steady them. The poison that had almost killed her was in that container. Taking even a microscopic taste could reignite the cardiac symptoms that had nearly stopped her heart. But Amira was somewhere in this city, or on its edges, waiting for a mother who had promised never to let her down. "Once you taste it, you have about 45 seconds before the bitterness overtakes everything," Marcus warned. "The lab will have an antidote kit ready, atropine and activated charcoal, but there's no guarantee." Maria nodded. She had already made her peace with the risk. What she needed now was focus, the kind her grandmother had taught her to summon when every distraction fell away and the world compressed into a single point of sensation. She closed her eyes and saw Amachi Rani in the kitchen in Kerala, the old woman's gnarled fingers dropping a single black peppercorn onto Maria's outstretched tongue. "Taste the soil it grew in," Amachi had said. "Taste the rain that fed it. Everything has a story, and the tongue can read it if the mind is still." She lifted the spoon. The stew was cold and gelatinous now, the lamb fat congealed, but the spice blend still sang. She took the smallest possible sip, just enough to coat her tongue, and immediately the familiar notes rushed back. Cumin, cardamom, saffron, sumac, the whole symphony she had named that night. But beneath them, that wrong note, the metallic tang, the faint numbness spreading across her palate like frost on a window. She didn't fight it, she let it bloom. Aconitine had a specific signature. Her grandmother had never encountered the poison, but she had taught Maria to discern alkaloids in plants, bitter compounds that protected leaves from insects. Monkshood was a mountain flower, growing in cold, mineral-rich soil. The toxin carried traces of that soil, invisible to machines, but not to a palate that had been trained since childhood to taste the geography of spices. Maria let the bitterness unfold, searching for the secondary notes. There, a hint of limestone, chalky and ancient. A whisper of glacial meltwater, that clean, sharp mineral edge. And something else, unexpected, a faint sweetness, organic and cloying like decayed honey. It didn't belong in a aconitine from the Himalayas. It suggested the plant had been cultivated, not wild harvested, fertilized with something specific, bone meal perhaps, or fish emulsion, common in greenhouse operations. "Get me a map of Central Asia," Maria whispered, her voice strained. A detailed topographical map, and any agricultural records for aconite cultivation in the region. Nor exchanged a glance with Marcus, then ordered one of her officers to pull up satellite imagery on a tablet. As Maria continued to analyze the aftertaste, her mind tracing the poison's origin like a bloodhound on a scent, she realized the truth was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. The aconitine was not imported, it was local. The limestone signature matched the strata of the Hajar Mountains, a range that ran through the UAE and northern Oman. The cultivation methods were consistent with a sophisticated indoor grow operation, using hydroponics and controlled lighting. Faisal's villa in Al-Barsha had contained a small lab, but the quantities found there were not enough to produce the pure, crystallized poison that had been used. There was another facility, larger, more professional. And that facility, Maria realized with a surge of terror, was likely where Amira was being held, not just hidden, but kept near the source of the toxin because Faisal planned to use her as a hostage while he completed one final transaction. The calendar date, March 18th, was the deadline for the poison's delivery to whoever had ordered the assassination. Faisal wasn't just trying to kill his uncle, he was manufacturing weapons-grade toxin for an external buyer, a transaction worth tens of millions of dollars, and Amira was his insurance policy against interference. Marcus's phone rang. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and his face went pale. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "Faisal just posted a video to an encrypted channel routed through a dozen servers. He's holding your daughter in front of a camera. She's alive, but he's making demands." They crowded around the tablet as Noor pulled up the video. It was shaky, lit by a single bare bulb. Amira sat on a concrete floor, clutching her stuffed rabbit, tears streaking her face but her eyes defiant, so much like her mother. Faisal stood behind her, his face obscured by a keffiyeh, a gun visible in his right hand. He spoke in accented English, a message aimed at Sheikh Rahman. "Uncle, you are still alive because I allowed it." The waitress meddled, "But that was an inconvenience, not a failure. I have the child now. If you want her to live, you will transfer $500 million to an account I have provided. You will announce your retirement from all business interests within 24 hours. If you do not comply, the girl dies. And if anyone attempts a rescue, I release the rest of my product into Dubai's water supply. I have enough aconitine to poison the entire city." The video ended. The silence in the freezer was absolute. Maria's first instinct was to scream, to collapse, to surrender to the despair crushing her chest. But something deeper rose up, something forged in the years of working double shifts while her daughter slept on a cot in the corner, of negotiating with loan sharks while Amira drew pictures of hearts on scrap paper, of surviving a dose of poison that had been meant to kill. She was not just a victim. She was the one person on Earth who could identify the poison's source down to the specific greenhouse where it had been grown. And if she could do that, she could lead the rescue team to the exact location before Faisal ever saw them coming. "I know where he is," Maria said, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. "The sweetness I tasted, it's not just fertilizer, it's date syrup. He's growing the monkshood in a facility that also processes dates. That's how he's masking the chemical signature. And the Hajar Mountain limestone means he's somewhere in the agricultural belt between Al Ain and the Omani border. There are only 3 commercial date processing plants in that corridor with sealed, climate-controlled greenhouses attached. One of them is owned by a subsidiary of Al Rashid Holdings. It's the only one that could hide a bioweapons lab." Noor was already on her phone, mobilizing a tactical team, but Maria stopped her. "If you go in with sirens and helicopters, he'll kill her before you reach the door. He has cameras everywhere, he'll see you coming from miles away." She turned to Marcus. "I need to go in alone. I'm the one he underestimated. I'm just a waitress, remember? Let me walk in as a bargaining chip, trade myself for my daughter. While he's focused on me, Your men can breach from the back, from the service tunnels under the processing plant, but I have to be the distraction." Marcus looked at her as if she had asked to fly to the moon. "Absolutely not. You're a civilian, you're still recovering, and Faisal will kill you on sight." "He won't kill me immediately," Maria countered. "He's curious, he's arrogant. He'll want to know how a waitress from Kerala could taste his poison and survive. He'll want to gloat. Give me 10 minutes in that room with him, and I'll give you Amira." It was a plan born of desperation, but it was the only plan they had. Noor reluctantly agreed to coordinate the tactical insertion, using a small team of special forces operators who could infiltrate through the date processing tunnels without triggering the perimeter sensors. Maria would approach the front gate alone, unarmed, claiming to have escaped from the hospital and wanting to negotiate. A wire would be taped beneath her clothing, transmitting everything she heard. If at any point she gave a predetermined code word, saffron, the spice that had once saved her life, the team would breach immediately and engage. As dawn broke over the desert, Maria climbed into an unmarked car and began the 2-hour drive toward the Al Ain agricultural zone, the Hajar Mountains rising like a dark wave on the horizon. The wire was cold against her skin. She could taste the residual poison still lingering on her tongue, a constant reminder of what she was walking into. But she could also taste the memory of her grandmother's kitchen, the warmth of cumin toasting in a dry pan, the scent of Amira's hair when she kissed her goodnight. Somewhere ahead, in a concrete room that smelled of pesticides and bleach, a 5-year-old girl was waiting for her mother to prove that the most powerful weapon in the world was not money or guns or even poison. It was a love so fierce it could taste the difference between life and death and choose to swallow both if it meant saving the one who mattered most. The car passed the final checkpoint, and the gate of the date processing plant swung open. Maria stepped out into the pale morning light and walked toward the glass doors, her heart pounding a rhythm like a war drum. Behind those doors, Faisal was waiting, and somewhere in the building, so was Amira. The shipment had not yet departed. The story was not yet over. The final act was about to begin. The glass doors opened into a vast, chilled lobby that smelled of dates and industrial cleaner. No security guard stepped forward to stop Maria. She had been expected. Faisal's paranoia was matched only by his arrogance, and the idea of a single, unarmed waitress walking into his fortress must have seemed like a gift. He would not pass up the chance to gloat. A man in a white lab coat, not a guard, appeared from a side corridor and gestured for her to follow. His badge identified him as Dr. Hassan Al-Mazrui, the facility's chief botanist. His hands were stained yellow from the date syrup, and he looked at Maria with something between curiosity and pity, as if he were a man who had traded his conscience for a salary and was only now realizing he had been paid too little. They descended a staircase into the bowels of the facility, past rows of palm trees being processed by automated sorters, past cold storage rooms where crates of the finest Emirati dates sat waiting for export. The humming of machinery grew fainter as they entered a restricted area sealed by a biometric lock. Dr. Al-Mazrui pressed his thumb to a scanner, and the door hissed open. Beyond it was a different world. Floor-to-ceiling grow lamps cast a purple glow over hundreds of monkshood plants, their hooded indigo flowers shimmering with a lethal beauty. In the corner, a glass chamber contained trays of crystallized white powder, the purified aconitine, enough to kill tens of thousands of people. The place was a factory of death disguised as a garden, and in the center of the laboratory, tied to a metal chair, sat Amira. Her eyes were red from crying, but when she saw her mother step into the room, a spark of recognition ignited. She didn't scream, she didn't cry out, she just stared, as if her mother's presence had turned the terror into a dream she could finally wake from. Faisal al-Rashid stood beside her, one hand resting on the back of the chair, the other holding a remote detonator no larger than a car key. A single press, he had warned in his video, would release aerosolized aconitine into the ventilation system and from there into the surrounding town. Whether the claim was real or a bluff, no one could afford to test it. "You are exactly as foolish as I hoped," Faisal said, his voice dry with satisfaction. "A waitress, a mother, a woman with no power but a tongue that can taste poison. You walked in here thinking you could bargain. But you have nothing to offer me except your own life, which is worth less than the soles of my shoes." Maria held his gaze. The wire beneath her shirt was transmitting every word to the tactical team waiting in the service tunnels below the processing floor. She needed to buy them time. She needed Faisal to keep talking, and she needed him to underestimate her just long enough for the world to tilt. "You're wrong," Maria said quietly. "I have exactly what you're afraid of. Proof. Real proof. Your uncle's security team found the original recipe in Hadi's files. The broth wasn't poisoned by accident. You paid him to add the aconitine to the final batch, but you didn't account for Hadi keeping records. He wrote down every ingredient, including the extra one you requested, the monkshood extract he sourced from this very facility. The lab has already matched the chemical signature of the poison in my blood to the batch sitting in those trays. You're caught, Faisal. Even if you kill me, the evidence chain is unbroken." Faisal's expression flickered, the smugness giving way to something sharper. Maria was bluffing about the recipe. Hadi had left no such record, but she knew the mind of a guilty man, fed on fear and paranoia, and her words had struck a nerve. He took a step toward her, the detonator still clutched in his hand. "You're lying." "Am I? Then why is your uncle's entire security apparatus already moving? Why do you think they let me walk in here alone? They wanted you to confirm the location. The moment I set foot in this building, a satellite tagged the facility. By now, your water supply threat has been neutralized. The municipal system has been diverted. Your aerosol plan won't work." She was improvising, layering one lie on top of another, but her voice never wavered. She had once told her daughter bedtime stories about brave girls who tricked monsters. Now she was living one. Behind Faisal, through the glass panel of the laboratory door, Maria caught the faintest flicker of movement. The tactical team had breached the underground tunnel. Any moment now, they would position themselves at the entrance. She just needed to keep his attention fixed on her. "You want to know how I survived your poison?" Maria said, taking a deliberate step forward. "It wasn't luck. It wasn't medicine. I survived because my grandmother taught me that every poison carries its antidote inside its signature. Monkshood is an alkaloid. Alkaloids break down in the presence of certain plant enzymes, enzymes found in turmeric Aleppi variety, the very spice I identified that night. I had eaten a turmeric paste with my rice at lunch. It wasn't enough to fully neutralize the aconitine, but it slowed the absorption long enough for the paramedics to reach me." She paused, letting the lie sink in. "I know your poison better than you do, Faisal. You're holding a weapon you don't even understand." His eyes narrowed. He wanted to believe she was bluffing, but the scientific precision of her claim rattled him. He had spent 2 years cultivating the monkshood, perfecting the distillation process, and yet a waitress from a village in Kerala was standing in his laboratory, lecturing him about alkaloid breakdowns. The arrogance that had sustained him crumbled at the edges. "Saffron," Maria said suddenly, her code word slipping into her speech as smoothly as she had once named spices for a billionaire who held her fate in his hands. "It's the one ingredient you couldn't replicate. That's why your poison had that strange bitterness. Your monkshood was grown under artificial light, never touched by real sun. The saffron in the stew contained a natural photocatalyst that reacted with the alkaloid. Without it, the poison was inert. You would have needed to expose the plants to full-spectrum sunlight for at least 3 weeks before harvesting. Your entire batch is defective. That's why I survived. That's why your uncle is alive. You failed at a molecular level." For 3 seconds, Faisal stood frozen, trying to process the claim. Those 3 seconds were all the tactical team needed. The door behind him exploded inward, and 4 figures in black combat gear swarmed the room. The detonator was ripped from his hand before his fingers could twitch. He was on the ground, face pressed against the concrete, his arms wrenched behind him. Dr. Al-Mazri dropped to his knees without resistance. The laboratory echoed with the sound of shouted commands and the clatter of weapons. And through the chaos, Maria ran to her daughter. She dropped to her knees in front of the metal chair, her hands fumbling with the zip ties that bound Amira's wrists. The tactical team had cutters, but Maria couldn't wait. She pulled and twisted until the plastic bit into her own fingers, drawing blood she didn't feel. When the final tie snapped, Amira collapsed forward into her arms, the one-eared rabbit crushed between them, her small body shaking with silent sobs. They held each other on the floor of a poison factory, surrounded by death and broken machinery, while the morning light began to filter through the grow lamps and the dust settled on the aconitine trays. The aftermath unfolded over days and then weeks. Faisal al-Rashid was charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and the production of weapons-grade toxins. The evidence Maria had provided, her detailed sensory analysis linking the poison to the date facility, became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Dr. al-Mazrui, in exchange for a reduced sentence, testified about the broader conspiracy. Claude Laroche, who had been hiding in a safe house in Oman, was extradited and arrested. The assassination plot against Sheikh Rahman turned out to be only one piece of a much larger plan to destabilize the region's agricultural sector using bioterrorism. The ringleaders in Southeast Asia, the cartel that had financed Faisal's debts, was slowly dismantled by an international task force that used his phone records as a roadmap. Sheikh Rahman kept every promise he made. Amira's heart surgery was performed by the best pediatric cardiologist in Europe, flown to Dubai on the Sheikh's private jet. The operation was successful. For the first time in her life, the little girl could run without gasping for breath, could laugh without her lips turning blue. The trust fund established in her name covered not just her future education, but the education of 20 other children from her mother's village in Kerala. And Maria became something she had never imagined possible. She was offered a position as a consultant for Interpol's Emerging Threats Division, working with forensic botanists to develop new methods for identifying toxic plant compounds by taste and smell alone. The woman who had once been invisible, a server navigating the margins of impossible wealth, was now a recognized expert whose testimony had brought down an international bioweapons network. She declined most of the media attention, but she did agree to one interview with a small news outlet from her home state in India because they promised to publish in Malayalam, the language her grandmother spoke. The headline read simply, "Amachi's kitchen saved the world." But the final surprising detail, the one that would haunt conspiracy theorists and inspire storytellers for years, emerged months later during the trial. When forensic accountants traced Faisal's financial transactions, they discovered that the first payment he received for the aconitine shipment came from an account linked to a rival hospitality group, a conglomerate that had been trying to acquire Al Jannah for years. The poison dish was never just about killing a sheikh. It was about destroying a restaurant's reputation, crashing its parent company's stock, and acquiring the real estate for pennies on the dirham. The assassination was also a hostile takeover, and the only reason it failed was that a single mother from Kerala, working a double shift to pay her daughter's medical bills, had inherited a gift so rare that it could taste the geography of death in a spoonful of stew. Maria still lives in Dubai, in a modest apartment not far from the hospital where Amira's heart was repaired. She no longer works double shifts, but she still cooks every day, the old recipes her grandmother taught her, the ones that call for patience and instinct and a palate that never forgets. Sometimes, late at night, she takes out the small tin box that once held her savings and opens it. Inside are not dirhams, but a single dried saffron thread, the most precious spice her grandmother ever owned. It still smells of sun and earth and something like hope. And when she closes her eyes, she can taste every mile of the journey that brought her here. That journey from a grandmother's kitchen in Kerala to a bioweapons lab hidden beneath a date processing plant should not have been possible. By every measure the world uses, Maria Joseph was nobody, a waitress, a single mother drowning in debt. A woman who cleaned plates and disappeared into the background while billionaires ate gold-leafed lamb above a glittering sea. And yet when the moment came, when a single spoonful of poisoned stew separated life from death, it was her voice that named every ingredient, her tongue that detected the invisible killer, her courage that walked into a fortress to trade her own life for a child who had only one heart and one chance. The machinery of power, money, intelligence agencies, police task forces chased the conspiracy after the fact, but they were following a trail that Maria had already blazed with nothing but her senses and a love so absolute it rewired the chemistry of fear. The story resonates because it dismantles a myth we have been sold all our lives, that heroism belongs to people with titles, uniforms, and resources. Sheikh Rahman had $4.2 billion and a private security detail, yet he lay dying on a ballroom floor while his billions meant nothing. Trained paramedics stood baffled, while a woman who learned healing from a grandmother who never saw a textbook stepped forward and did what could not be done. The world is full of invisible experts, immigrants driving cabs who were surgeons in their home countries, cleaners who hold PhDs, waitresses whose grandmothers passed down knowledge older than empires. How many of them pass us every day unseen, their gifts dormant until the precise moment when only their specific knowledge can save a life. Maria's story asks us to reconsider everyone we overlook. The person serving your coffee might carry within them a skill the world has never learned to value. And there is a secondary truth here, one that becomes more urgent the longer you sit with it. The conspiracy was not just about murder, it was about money. A hospitality conglomerate wanted to crash a stock price and acquire a restaurant property. To do that, they were willing to kill a billionaire, silence witnesses, abduct a child, and poison a city's water supply. The line between corporate greed and terrorism had blurred to invisibility. The only thing standing between that plan and catastrophe was a woman who had been told all her life that her talent had no market value, that her palate was a party trick, that her knowledge was irrelevant outside a village kitchen. When the systems failed, when the institutions proved too slow or too compromised, a single human being's deep, inherited wisdom became the last line of defense. How many other catastrophes are averted or caused by similar invisible forces? We will never know. The ones that succeed never make the headlines. Maria still carries that saffron thread. Amira still draws pictures of hearts and runs without losing breath. The conspirators sit in prison, but the structure that created them, the shell companies, the hired hitmen, the corrupt doctors, the desperate managers, still exists in 100 other cities, waiting for the right price. The question Maria's story leaves us with is not whether such threats will emerge again, but whether we will be ready to recognize the unlikely hero standing right in front of us when they do. Are we paying attention? Do we see the people we have been trained not to see? Do we value knowledge that comes from kitchens and grandmothers and ancient oral traditions? Or do we dismiss it until a billionaire's throat closes and there is no one else? This story moved you, let it move your behavior too. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their skills, however ordinary they seem, could one day change everything. Hit the like button so more people discover what courage looks like when it wears a waitress's uniform. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us the world is still full of quiet heroes. And tell us in the comments, what is your hidden gift? What knowledge has your family passed down that the world might need one day? You may never face a poisoned dish or a bioweapons lab, but somewhere, sometime, your moment will arrive. And when it does, you will understand what Maria understood in that freezer vout, staring at a cold spoon and a destiny she never asked for. You can buy a lot of things in this world. You can buy silence. You can buy loyalty. You can even buy a restaurant with a view of the Arabian Gulf. But you cannot buy the ability to taste death and choose life anyway. That is not for sale. That is inheritance. That is love. That is the one ingredient no billionaire can purchase and no conspiracy can destroy.